The clock is ticking, and the world may have just crossed a line it can't come back from. In the last 24 hours, the United States has quietly moved to deploy up to 3,000 elite paratroopers into the Middle East, joining an already massive force of over 50,000 American troops positioned across the region. This isn't routine. This isn't symbolic. This is the 82nd Airborne Division, America's fastest strike force, units trained to parachute directly into active war zones within 18 hours. And they're not being sent for peacekeeping. They're being sent because something is going very, very wrong. While Washington prepares for rapid deployment, Iran has unleashed waves of missile and drone strikes, targeting Israel and key regional positions, triggering what some analysts are already calling the most dangerous escalation in the Middle East in decades. But here's where it gets even more serious. Behind the headlines, military planners are discussing scenarios that go far beyond defense, seizing strategic and neft choke points like the Strait of Hormuz, launching operations against Iran's core infrastructure, and potentially preparing for boots on the ground inside Iran itself. Let that sink in. Because history shows, once airborne units are activated at this scale, events move fast, and the escalation ladder has already begun. First came airstrikes, then naval deployments. Now, rapid response ground forces, each step tighter, each move more irreversible. Meanwhile, global markets are already reacting. Oil prices surging past $100, signaling panic over a potential shutdown of global energy supply routes. Because if the Strait of Hormuz is disrupted, up to 20% of the world's oil flow could be affected. So the real question is no longer, is there a conflict? The question now is, how far is this going to go? Because with elite troops mobilizing, warships moving into position, and missile exchanges intensifying, this may not be a regional war anymore. This may be the opening phase of something much bigger. 3,000 troops. On paper, it doesn't sound like enough to change a war, but in military terms, this changes everything. Because these are not just any troops. They are elements of the 82nd Airborne Division, one of the most elite and strategically critical units in the entire U.S. military. And when they move, it's never random. Here's what most people don't understand. The 82nd Airborne is not designed for long wars. It's designed for the first 72 hours of chaos. They secure airports, they capture strategic choke points, they establish forward operating positions, and they prepare the battlefield for larger invasion forces. This is what military planners call a forced entry operation. And historically, it only happens when something much bigger is coming next. Let's look at the pattern. In Gulf War, airborne forces were among the first to deploy before the full-scale assault. During the early stages of the Iraq War, rapid deployment units secured critical infrastructure ahead of armored divisions. Even in Afghanistan, airborne units were used to establish footholds in hostile territory. This isn't escalation by accident. This is escalation by design. Now combine that with what's already in place. The United States currently has over 50,000 troops spread across bases in the Middle East. Carrier strike groups positioned within striking distance long-range bombers on standby missile defense systems activated across allied nations. This is not a defensive posture anymore. This is a multi-layered war architecture. And here's where it gets more intense. Military analysts from organizations like the Center for Strategic and International Studies have long warned about one specific scenario. If Iran's regional attacks cross a certain threshold, the U.S. would shift from containment to direct engagement strategy, meaning targeted strikes on Iranian command centers, cyber warfare against infrastructure, and potentially coordinated ground operations. But why send airborne troops first? Because speed is everything. If key locations, airfields, ports, supply routes aren't secured early, any larger operation becomes slower, riskier, and far more deadly. So this deployment may not be about what's happening right now. It may be about what the Pentagon believes is coming next. And that raises a much darker possibility. What if this isn't just preparation, but pre-positioning for a full-scale regional war? Because once airborne troops are in place, the window for de-escalation begins to close, fast. While the world focuses on troop movements, Iran has been preparing for this moment for decades, not with one army, but with an entire network of war fronts. At the center of it all is the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, a force built not just to defend Iran, but to project power across the entire Middle East. And its real strength isn't just inside Iran's borders, it's everywhere else. Because Iran doesn't fight wars the traditional way. It fights through layers. First layer, missile power. Iran now possesses over 3,000 ballistic missiles. Advanced cruise missiles capable of precision strikes, drone swarms designed to overwhelm air defenses. Some of these missiles can reach over 2,000 kilometers, putting not just Israel, but U.S. bases across the region within range. And they don't need air superiority, they just need volume. Second layer, proxy warfare. This is where things get truly dangerous. Iran has spent years building alliances with armed groups across multiple countries. Hezbollah in Lebanon, militias in Iraq and Syria, the Houthis controlling key maritime routes. Each one acts like a separate front line, which means if conflict escalates, it won't be one war. It will be 5 wars happening at the same time. Third layer, economic choke points. Iran sits next to the most critical energy artery on Earth, the Strait of Hormuz. Roughly 1 in every 5 barrels of oil passes through this narrow corridor, and Iran has repeatedly threatened to shut it down, not with large fleets, but with fast attack boats, naval mines, anti-ship missiles, low-cost tactics, with global-level consequences. Now combine all 3 layers, missiles raining down, proxy groups opening new fronts, global oil routes under threat. This is what military strategists call asymmetric escalation, and it's exactly how Iran avoids fighting the US head-on while still inflicting maximum damage. According to analysts at the Brookings Institution, this kind of networked warfare creates a nightmare scenario. Even if one front is contained, another one ignites, and another, and another. So when people ask, can Iran really challenge the United States? They're asking the wrong question. The real question is, can the United States handle a war that has no single battlefield? Because if all these layers activate at once, this won't look like a traditional war. It will look like a system under attack from every direction at the same time. If Iran is building pressure across multiple fronts, then Israel is preparing to break the system entirely. Because for Israel, this isn't just another escalation, this is existential. At the center of Israel's response is one doctrine: overwhelming force, immediate retaliation, zero hesitation. And that doctrine is already being activated. Israel's military, anchored by the Israel Defense Forces, IDF, has shifted into high-intensity operational mode. We're talking about full Air Force mobilization, precision strike campaigns deep beyond its borders, cyber operations, targeting command and control systems, and rapid reserve troop activation across the country. This is not containment. This is preparation for escalation dominance. But here's where things take a dangerous turn. Israel has a long-standing strategy known as the Begin Doctrine. The principle is simple. Any existential threat must be eliminated before it fully emerges. Historically, that has meant preemptive strikes, destroying nuclear reactors, targeting weapons facilities, eliminating high-value leadership targets. And now, analysts believe that doctrine may be back in play. Because if Iran's attacks intensify, or its nuclear capability is perceived to be accelerating, Israel may not wait. It may strike directly, inside Iran. And that's the moment everything changes. Because a direct Israel-Iran confrontation doesn't stay contained. It triggers alliances. It activates defense agreements. It pulls in global powers. Here's the escalation ladder from Israel's side. Step 1, defensive interceptions, Iron Dome arrow systems. Step 2, retaliatory airstrikes on proxies. Step 3, deep strikes on Iranian-linked infrastructure. Step 4, direct targeting inside Iran. We are now hovering between Step 2 and Step 3, and the next move could skip straight to Step 4. According to experts at the Institute for National Security Studies, once direct strikes on Iran begin, the conflict shifts from regional to interstate war, with consequences that are far harder to control, because Iran will not absorb that quietly. It will respond faster and harder. And here's the most dangerous variable. Israel is widely believed to possess undeclared nuclear capabilities. It has never confirmed them, but it has never denied them either, which creates a terrifying possibility. If Israel feels its survival is at risk, would it escalate beyond conventional warfare? That's the question no one wants to answer. Because once that line is crossed, there's no escalation ladder anymore. There is only free fall. What's happening right now is no longer just about Iran or Israel. It's about who gets pulled in next. Because once multiple global powers start aligning behind different sides, conflicts stop being regional. They become system-wide crises. Right now, the United States is already deeply embedded, militarily, politically, and strategically. With over 50,000 troops in the region, carrier strike groups deployed, and rapid response forces like the 82nd Airborne moving into position, Washington is no longer watching from the sidelines. It's inside the equation. But here's where the situation becomes far more complex. Because the US is not the only superpower with interests in this conflict. Enter Russia. For years, Russia has maintained a strategic partnership with Iran. Military coordination in Syria, weapons collaboration, shared opposition to US influence in the region. While Russia may not jump directly into combat, it can provide intelligence support, supply advanced weapon systems, apply pressure in other theaters like Eastern Europe, opening parallel stress points for the United States. Then there's China. China's stake isn't military first, it's economic. China imports massive amounts of oil from the Middle East. It has long-term strategic agreements with Iran, and it depends heavily on stable global trade routes. If the Strait of Hormuz is disrupted, China's economy feels it almost immediately. So while China may avoid direct war, it could push diplomatic countermeasures, increase naval presence, or economically challenge U.S. actions on the global stage. And then comes the wild card, NATO. If U.S. forces are directly attacked, Article 5 discussions begin, which means an attack on one becomes a conversation about response from many. Now step back and look at the full board. The U.S. deploying troops, Iran activating regional networks, Israel preparing high-impact strikes, Russia watching for opportunity, China protecting economic lifelines, NATO standing behind its largest member. This is no longer a straight-line conflict. This is a web of pressure points. According to analysis from the RAND Corporation, modern conflicts between major powers rarely begin as full-scale wars. They expand gradually through miscalculations, retaliations, and chain reactions, until suddenly, everyone is involved. And here's the most dangerous part. No single player controls the escalation anymore, because once enough actors are moving, the system begins to move on its own. Everything we've uncovered points to one unavoidable reality. This is no longer a single conflict. This is a multi-layered escalation system, and it's reaching critical pressure. Let's connect the chain, step by step. The United States mobilizes rapid response forces like the 82nd Airborne Division. Iran activates missile systems and proxy networks across multiple countries. Israel prepares for high-impact, potentially preemptive strikes under existential doctrine. Global powers like Russia and China position themselves strategically, and alliances like NATO stand ready to respond. If lines are crossed individually, each move is explainable. Together, they form a system under strain, and history gives us a warning. Not because it repeats exactly, but because it rhymes. Before major global conflicts, there's always a phase like this. Rising tensions, rapid deployments, strategic ambiguity, and a belief that escalation can still be controlled. Until suddenly, it isn't. Right now, several critical fault lines are aligning at the same time. Military overextension. With tens of thousands of troops deployed, the U.S. faces the risk of being pulled into multiple simultaneous engagements, stretching logistics, response time, and strategic focus. Economic shockwaves. If the Strait of Hormuz is disrupted, up to 20% of global oil supply could be impacted, triggering inflation spikes, market instability, and potential global recession. Multi-front warfare. Iran's layered strategy means conflict doesn't stay contained. One strike leads to another, across different borders, different actors, different battlefields. Nuclear ambiguity. With Israel's undeclared capabilities and Iran's controversial nuclear trajectory, the line between conventional and unconventional escalation becomes dangerously thin. According to long-term assessments from the RAND Corporation and the Brookings Institution, the greatest risk in modern warfare isn't always intentional escalation. It's miscalculation, a misread signal, a delayed response, a strike that goes further than expected. And once that happens, escalation doesn't pause, it accelerates. And this is where time becomes the most critical factor. Because the next few days, or even hours, could determine the direction of everything. Will deployments stabilize the situation? Or will they trigger the next phase of escalation? Will deterrence hold? Or will one side decide the risk is worth it? Here's the uncomfortable truth. There are only two paths forward now. Path 1, controlled de-escalation. Back-channel diplomacy, strategic restraint, and calculated pauses prevent the system from tipping over. Path 2, chain reaction. One major trigger event, a direct strike, a mass casualty attack, or a strategic misstep, and the conflict expands beyond control. Because at this level, no one truly wins. Even a limited war could reshape global alliances, disrupt economies worldwide, redefine military strategy for decades. So when people ask, is this the start of a world war? The answer isn't simple, but it's also not comforting, because the pieces are moving, the pressure is building, and the margin for error is shrinking fast. If you want to stay ahead of global events explained with clarity, not chaos, subscribe now. Because the next update on this story might not just be another headline, it might be the moment everything changes.